Let's bring in right now Democratic Representative from California, Chairman of the House Committee on Energy and Commerce, Congressman Henry Waxman. He's also the author of the Waxman Report, How Congress Really Works. Now, we were talking about the Congressman earlier today because yesterday on a radio program, he talked about the Democrats' uphill battle with Republicans on the health care. He said something that some people are talking about. Let's play the tape.
My first choice would be to have a good bill with bipartisan support. But we can only control that so much because it appears that the Republican Party leadership in the Congress has made a decision that they want to try to deny President Obama success, which means, in my mind, they're rooting against the country as well.
All right. We've got Henry, I've got a lot to talk to you about. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be with you.
Hey, let's first of all talk about the clip yesterday. Do you really think Republicans in Congress are cheering against America?
No, I don't. What I was expressing was I know the frustration of being in the minority. I was part of the minority when the Democrats were out of power for 12 years, and it's difficult to try to figure out the role. And one role could be to work on a bipartisan basis and get things done, but that could give political benefits to the majority. So sometimes the minority decides they're going to try to defeat things so that the party in power has nothing to show for the successes of their administration. Well, I expressed some frustration that the Republican leadership, even though Martin Feldstein, a very conservative economist, said that we needed a stimulus bill, no Republicans in the House voted for it. And on climate change, which is more a regional fight than a partisan one, we had most Republicans voting against it. But I don't want to throw fire at this situation. I know how difficult it is to be in the minority.
So it was just,
I hope we can work together.
Right?
I think it's the Republican frustration that's led them to want to oppose things, and it was my frustration because I want bipartisanship in order to get things done. But I think it's like saying, and you did a minute ago, I like the CIA because I'm a patriotic American. Well, that means if anybody's critical of the CIA, they're not patriotic.
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't want to say to Republicans who are rooting against the country because I don't believe that. So I apologize for any inference of that along those lines.
And let me just say, Henry, I apologize if any Democrat thought I was talking specifically about them not loving the country. Of course, you and I both know I was only talking about Lawrence O'Donnell, who burns an American flag every morning for breakfast. That's how he cooks his eggs, burning an American flag.
I think the audience got that. I think it was really just me.
It was just you.
It's not.
So we've got a lot to talk about. I want to talk about your book, but before we get there, yesterday, for the first time in some time, America wasn't seen as the bad boy on climate change at a global conference. All right, so now we're not the bad guys. Now it's India and China. And I know you've heard conservatives say all along, even if we signed on to these climate change bills, we still would have India and China out there, much bigger problems. How do we drag them into the 21st century to take your position on climate change?
I think we have to move away from the good guys and the bad guys. We have to learn to work with people, and that's why I regretted the idea that Republicans might not be rooting for the country, because I got to work with Republicans. They have to work with me. The United States has to work with the international community because global warming is not a problem we're going to solve alone. We're going to need the rest of the world to be with us. But what we saw for the last 8 years was India and China saying the United States isn't doing anything, and the United States saying India and China's not doing anything. So nobody was doing what we needed to do to reduce the threat to all of us. So let's step back, not point fingers, and recognize that you have to keep working. If we show leadership on this issue and we develop technology to reduce carbon emissions, we're going to have a worldwide market, and if people in other countries are going to recognize that they can't be left behind, they've got to be with us.
Hey, we've got Time Magazine's editor Rick Stingle here. Rick.
Representative Waxman, the argument that China...
Chairman, do you? Okay, he's trying to reach out, and here you are.
Come on.
Call him Chairman. He worked hard for that title.
Chairman.
This is my congressman you're talking about here.
You went from Representative Scarborough to just Joe, so you can call me Henry.
No, he's Chairman. He worked hard for that title.
Exactly.
Do not call Barbara Boxer ma'am.
Yes. I know you rest a lot on making sure that everybody is called the appropriate
Exactly.
term.
And he is
that's
chairman.
why you call him crazy.
We call you Mr. Editor.
Okay.
Right, exactly.
Chairman Waxman.
Better.
The argument that China and India make is that the United States and the industrialized nations over the past 25 and 50 years have been able to pollute while growing their economies. What we in India and China want to do is essentially the same thing, yet you're putting restrictions on us for growth. Should the U.S. act unilaterally to make changes, but how do we bring China and India along? Because they don't really want to go along.
They realize that they have to be part of this effort. They know better. They're using that argument rhetorically, and we've got to challenge it. We don't want to hold them back economically, but as they develop their economy, they have to do it in a way that recognizes that we cannot survive with the kind of carbon input that has led to global warming and climate change, and the scientists are telling dire consequences may result from all of this. So we've got to say to them, we're going to be the leaders, we're going to work on technology, work with us, and as we look for opportunities to reduce carbon emissions at the least expensive amounts, we can work with them to help them, because a lot of the carbon offsets we can purchase in those countries. So we need to keep working at it. Diplomacy is not something you sit down at a table and work out immediately. Diplomacy is showing leadership and trying to get others to go along and do what's in our mutual interests.
Hey, Henry, talk about the Waxman report, how Congress really works. If Americans buy that book, what are they going to learn?
I wanted to say in this book two things. One, government can be a very powerful force for good for millions of people. And what we hear all the time is government can do no good, and Congress is completely inept. What a lot of people don't see is that people in Congress on a bipartisan basis are working on legislation, going through some difficult fights, passing laws that really are important in people's lives, and you don't hear about that. You always hear about the scandals. So I went through in this book some examples. Most people take for granted that they can go into a store and read the nutritional label and find out information about the foods that they may eat and how it's going to affect their diet and their health. Well, that was a result of a battle that the food industry resisted because they didn't want to put these labels on. We finally got them to do it, and now people take it for granted.
And Henry, can you apply this book, though, to what you're in the middle of right now, which is a battle not only with the healthcare industry, but also with some in the White House who are trying to water down your bill? I mean, that's going on in real time. Talk about that fight and how you apply it in the Waxman report.
Well, we've got to reach compromises in order to get the coalitions necessary to get things done. But it's interesting how some of those fights and compromises that produce legislation produce good legislation, even better than many people expected when the legislation was adopted. And years from now, after we've adopted the energy bill and the climate control part of it, people will say, what was the big deal all about? We wanted to reduce American dependence on foreign oil. We wanted to reduce carbon emissions so that we could stop global warming. And we wanted to produce new jobs in this country by redirecting our economy into developing new technology and using it. And I believe that will be so successful that rather than all the controversy we hear about now, people will say, why did it take Congress so long? I also hope that we'll have people looking back at this year and say, why did it take so long to have health insurance for all Americans? The costs are unsustainable right now for Medicare and Medicaid. Most people are finding their insurance rates going up every single year. And so they want something done. President Obama has taken on this issue. He had a mandate to get reform. And if Congress gets together and passes this bill, people will say, that was really strange that we had a situation in the United States at one time where we spent more for health care than any country in the world, and we had 46 to 50 million people uninsured. Yeah. A lot of people insured that found the insurance wasn't there when they needed it. So I think when you solve these problems, people sometimes take it for granted after it's done, But Congress can do the job, and government must be there to make sure that in both of these two areas we establish the rules so the markets can work and we can benefit the American people.
All right. Chairman Henry Waxman, thank you so much. We appreciate you being here.
Hope people read the book.
The book is The Waxman Report, How Congress Really Works.